projection for this. And in your notes, I left some pages. And in fact, you will even note on the last page, the one line at the bottom should go on the other side. So I've given you that both we're going to be talking about governance and we're going to be talking about High Council. So those are just note pages for our discussion. Today, before lunch, we're going to talk about governance. And then after lunch, we'll be talking about High Council. And I have two big folders for the 2006 High Council that we attended and the 2011 High Council. And you're welcome to come and look at it. It's a lot of material. The only thing we're sworn to after the High Council is not to reveal the votes for 10 years. So give me a call in 2016. And we got, in fact, they might even, I didn't even think of it, it might even be in the folder there, but if you come across it, forget about it. And that's only to say that the numbers don't matter. God is correct. So you may have a lot of questions about that. I was the president of the High Council in 2011, and we decided to live stream it. Some of you were telling me, Betty and Dean were telling me that you saw it live stream, and we were trying to demystify the High Council because there's no mystery about it. It's just waiting on the Lord, and it is quite an interesting procedure. We'll talk about that in a second. We're going to talk about governance today. The Salvation Army is a unique organization. As I said, it's one of the few that are truly international. I'm just going to go over some general principles, and then I'm going to open it up for discussion. The word leadership is very interesting word. It's an English word, there's a Spanish word, liderazgo. But liderazgo is a Spanish translation of the English word. The word is really English derivative. It comes from the English language. Excuse me. In the scriptures, for instance, in the King James Version, you find the word leader and leadership only a couple times in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. It was not a word used a great deal. Now, in the new translations, like the New International Version, you find it used up to 207 times to translate Hebrew in Greek words, because the understanding of leadership, and I think the leadership, the servant leadership of Jesus, has changed over the years. Now try to follow me on this because it has to do with governance. As I said, we are a monolithic structure. Orders go down the line, words, and directions. We are living in a day and age, however, of team, of leveling out the field. So this presents a problem for us. Look at the translations of the Bible. As monarchy during the 19th century, the 1800s, most of the world was governed by monarchs. The king, the queen, or the dictator was in charge. And he or she made all of the decisions. There was no, whatever they wanted, they got. As monarchies declined in the 19th century, the 1800s, the word in the Bible for ruler changed to leader. So as monarchies declined and democracy increased, the whole concept of leadership changed. Still, there are a few monarchies in which the king or the queen makes the decision. That's not true in England, of course. That's all part of their culture. But it's really prime minister that makes the decisions. It's Parliament that makes the decision. But the queen is influential, and she's still loved and well respected. But there are very few monarchies left. There are some, of course, dictators left. Now, let me say it again. As monarchies declined and democracies increased, the word for ruler, the word for the hefe, the ruler, chief, in the Bible, changed in its, the translators changed it to leader. We have a whole new concept of leadership. And it was so nice. I thank Majors for providing the book on spiritual leadership. I consciously made it a short book. The chapters are very short. I encourage you to read it only because this is who you are.
Praise God.
John 15:16. Jesus says to his disciples, he says to you and to me, you have not chosen me. I have chosen you and ordained you to go and bring forth fruit that will last. God has called you into leadership. And I'd encourage you to just read maybe a little chapter a day. Because what I hope that it is, and some have indicated that it's helpful, it's short. You know, most books are pretty large, and books on leadership, you go to the library or go to a bookstore, it's one of the largest sections of the books on leadership. And there's a lot of books about it. I've tried to make it succinct. What is God calling you to do? And how is he calling you to do it? You all have key roles. Now, when it comes to governance, however, how do we fit this together? Our structure fits better in a monarchy. We have a monarchical structure. It's a good structure. It's a structure that has kept us strong for a century and a half. It has the ability, it is flexible, because the general and the territorial leadership, all the different leaders, can easily make changes just by sending a memo. You know, this is it. But this doesn't fit into the understanding today of leadership being more democratic. Leadership where you have a leader, but the leader is responsible to the board or to other groups of people. I believe it can work. I believe we're seeing it work. But gone is the day, by the way, if you're in leadership in the Army, gone is the day when you can send a memo to somebody and it'll be done. That's all you do. You and I grew up in that era. Most of you here, and especially those who would be sitting hair-shaved as mine. We grew up where whatever the Corps officer said, we did it. Without question. I grew up in a home. I told you about my father, did I not? The fine Eagle Order over there. He loved the Salvation Army. It was the best thing that came down from it. He said to me when I was actually thinking, I was in college thinking of doing something else in the ministry with another group. And I was born in the fire and I can't live in the smoke. And I've never quite figured out what that meant, except that he loved the Salvation Army because it was God's means of bringing him into faith. In our home, over the dinner table, we could talk about anything, my sister Betty. We would talk about anything. It was really relaxing. We'd talk about anything. But we could not talk negatively about two things. Number one, the Salvation Army. Number two, the labor unions. My father got his job at the Ford Motor Company in Green Island, New York, during the Depression. He only drove a Ford, forgive me, Father. He only drove a Ford, and we would never cross the picket. He was a union. Back then, unions were a necessity, really, for fair wages. So we never talked negatively about the unions, although we tried to. It just didn't work. So the unions were out of at least talking negatively about it. And the Salvation Army. I thank the Lord. I grew up in a home where I could never say anything negative about the Army, even though I wanted to. For my father, my mom, the Corps officer was God's sent woman or man. And that was it. And you know, things worked out pretty well that way. We all knew that we're all human, and we knew that the Corps officer made mistakes, but they were God sent people. So that was a good thing. Back then, the divisional commander, even as I was an officer, the divisional commander was in charge of things, and he or she is. But all you have to do is send out a note, and why do you do it? It's from the boss. It's from the boss. We're living with a generation that doesn't understand, doesn't accept it. They want relational. They look for relationship. They can see right through you. This generation, we never even question. They question all the time. So I start out talking about governance in this way, just to help us to see that our structure is strong, and it is good, and it is practical. It makes things happen. I thank the Lord. I don't think we can change our structure. But we have to change how we act within the structure. I don't think there are many of you, or many of us, who can remember the sermons our Corps officers preached. For 5 or 6 years, while I was 9 through 15 or so, we had the Wheatleys. Some of you may even know them. They retired. They were one of the Riddle Lord, Ken and Barbara Wheatley. I don't remember any sermon that the PC or the preached. What do I remember about Ken Wheatley? I remember that once in the mail I got a note from him, and it was a free membership to the YMCA. And he said, Billy, enjoy your membership to the YMCA. That's what I remember. Relationship. I remember we used to repeat the doctrines every Sunday night. Try it, by the way, sometime, even morning. We used to have what we called our affirmation of faith. And every Sunday night, all of my life, really, all the life I can remember back then, we would stand up. One Sunday night, he would begin. We believe that the scriptures of the Old and New Testament were given by inspiration of God. And then we would respond with the number 2. And then he 3, and we'd all go down. And it was always curious because what is our last doctrine end with? We believe in the last verse. And we believe in the endless punishment of the wicked. And everyone would say, amen. I always thought we say amen to the most negative comment. The endless punishment of the wicked. Amen. But you see, the next Sunday, we would start, and we would go back. You know, when I went to training college, everybody's worried about learning the doctrines. And what's the problem? I repeated the doctrines every week. I knew them. This is the heart of our ministry, and you know, we did that in our core. And I think it's worth it. You know, in some churches they repeat the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed. I love repeating the doctrines. You know, it only takes about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, just to get through it. And I always really felt good about it. Now we don't have many Sunday night meetings any longer, but now we did it in the morning. Yeah. What's my point? My point is that this is why I remember Reader Ken Week. And this is why people are going to remember you, because of your relationship, because of your spiritual leadership, the fact that they are loved, the fact that you care for them, the fact that you do little things like repeating the doctrine to help them spiritually. You really think it through. So when we talk about leadership, when we talk about organizational leadership, we are moving, we are keeping this wonderful structure we cannot change it. And yet we have to act differently. We have to listen to each other. We have to consult them. Right? It's happening. It's happening. But in the end, this is what I want. This is the really strength of our system. In the end, we have to salute and move forward. That's the beauty of our system. I was the DYS. We were the youth leaders in Massachusetts. Eddie Manford was my excellent secretary.
Wow.
Looks exactly the same. Dean, you look a little old. So do I. But back then, we had a DC named Wally Conn. Actually, he served in the South. He served in the South Force. Colonel Wally Conn. We were going through tough times in Massachusetts financially at that time. And I remember as a young captain around the board table talking about finances. And he, at times, believe it or not, would get very upset with the territorial headquarters. I'm trying to keep it within the board. But you see, you're all leaders, so you understand. We had money at THQ that they would not let us use. You understand this?
You want me to edit that part from the tape?
What's that?
You wanted to
take the recorder off. They had money we could not use. Now, we didn't understand all the reasons why we couldn't use it, but what we did understand is this is our money, and we are in bad trouble, and we can't use it. Now, what did I learn from Walter Conn? What I learned is he would fight tooth and nail for what he believed. He would call the territorial commander. He would write, always politely, but he would write. But then, you know what? And he said this to me. He said, when the decision comes, and it's not what we agree with, he said there's only one thing to do, and that is salute and move on. Not let it eat at you. Not say, oh, or complain. Not try to go around the system and figure out some way to get your way. I also learned from him that if the board says no, just keep asking. And there's some wisdom to it. It's another time. So this matter of governance in the Salvation Army is a balanced governance. We need relationship. We need to listen to each other for the combined wisdom. But then in the end, the great strength of the Army is we are under orders. And in the end, the people that give us the orders are invariably men and women of God who are not trying to hurt you, not trying to hurt us. You know, they might not see the whole picture as we see it, but they may see more of the picture than we see. So in the end, and it takes the weight off your shoulders, in the end, you fight for what you believe in. In the end, you say, yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. And you move on and you do it happy. You say, okay, that's it. I lost this battle, or... And the other thing that Major Conrad taught me, and I know some of you know him, that's why I'm using it, and I'm glad it's being taken. Wally Conrad is going through some difficult challenges right now, physically. He and his beautiful wife. So I honor him. I learned a lot from him. And I also learned not only do you salute and move on, but you salute and you support the decision. Loyalty. Loyalty is so important in an organization such as ours. And I heard people say, well, I never said anything negative. No, you just rolled your eyes when I said it. You know what the decision is, and you told them. That's a disloyal reaction. And this frees us up. This really frees us up, because then it's off. Right. There are other things to worry about, other things, you know. I was at, and I think this is important when we're talking about governance. I'll get to it in a second. But I remember we were at Old Orchard Beach. We were the DCs in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. And a lady came. We first of all had the retired, no, he wasn't retired, the national commander, Commissioner Andy, no one else like him, Miller. You know Commissioner Andy Miller? Here's this man of God who promised the Lord he would never be in the office of a business person where he didn't pray with him, offer prayer. He, you know, to him, evangelism, the gospel is the most important. Hats off to Commissioner Miller. Well, at Old Orchard, a retired officer came up to him. I happened to be there, and she said to him, you know, Commissioner, I've had something against you for 25 years. Anybody ever say that to you? And I did. So Commissioner Miller said, my dear, yes, what did I do? Well, when you were stationed at THQ in some department, probably the community relations department or something, we were serving under your leadership, and we put in a voucher for a $25 some type of a garbage can. And you didn't approve it because it was over the limit. And she said, I want to apologize for holding that against you for 25 years. But, know, but it's silly, isn't it? But it happens. It happens. We carry things. We carry things. So when we're talking about leadership in the Army, my plea is, and I say it to younger officers too, let it go. You know, let it. That could be a song. Let it go. Let it go. I think that's very, very good. Yes, Elsa would know what to do. Let it go. Okay. Now, I talked about the IMC. The IMC stands for the International Management Council. They meet 20 people around a large round table. When you go to IHQ, you go in the lobby, there's the desk there, and they greet you. And two, if you're facing the desk, to the right of the desk is this huge rotunda. Glass rotunda, but it's frosted with all of the countries of the world etched in the glass. Actually, I think it looks like it's etched in the glass because we can't add to it, so it's sort of pasted over the glass. All of the 126 countries. We sit there, the chief of the staff leads the meeting. There's always a large agenda. We're probably in there for at least a minimum of an hour and a half, sometimes all morning. And the decisions are made. So the governance of the International Army comes through the zones, the 5 zones. The zone secretaries make these presentations to the chief of the staff. He or she then puts them on the agenda. We talk about it, and a decision is made. Now, how are decisions made, by the way, in the Army? Here's another interesting thing, is that ostensibly, in every board of the Army, the chair has the final decision. It's always the case. You know, the DC, the corps officer in your corps councils.
Well, not so that the people who are used to boards, it's not the chair, but the chairman.
The chairman, that's true. That's true. Yes. Although I've been in some boards where that seat seemed to speak. The chairman, okay. Yeah, that's true. So we all know that. But we're in a day and age where we can't do that, and the general does not do that. Even strong, when I say strong generals, Shaw Clifton, for example, had very strong ideas. You know, and some of them were good, some of them I didn't always agree with, but he always knew that he had strong opinion. More so than perhaps other generals who approached it different personality. We all knew that the general would do anything he or she wants to do. And the chief of the staff has a lot of power. But let me tell you, right from the top on down, in the IMC, I never saw that happen. Everybody, all 22, 23 commissioners sitting around the table were allowed their opinion. And hopefully there would be a consensus. Now, when you have 23 people, you must understand that sometimes there's not a consensus. Right? Often there is not a consensus. And then you need the chairperson, the general, says, okay, and he gets a sense of what's happening. Usually, he makes the decision in favor of the majority opinion. Yes, we know he has the ability not to, but that's not a smart thing to do. Why have an IMC? Why have an advisory board? If you're going to constantly say, no, I'm the boss. And eventually, and I hear this, I only keep repeating this because I hear this from men and women in our country. I'm on the board at Trinity Western University in British Columbia 3 times a year. One of the ladies comes from a Wesleyan background, and she was an advisory board member. I'm so interested to talk to her. She left the advisory board for this very reason. Because the corps officer would not listen to what the advisory board recommended. So we've got to, this is the whole idea about governance, And it starts at the top, it starts at the IMC. I think it's I enjoyed those meetings thoroughly. We had a Colombian coffee right there. Just turned around and get it. I think it was Colombian. When the good decisions were made, it was. And it all depends. It all depends. So that's the one. Now, on Wednesday, there's also the International Finance Council meetings. And the Management Council deals with the larger decisions that are going to be made. Usually to do with personnel or major expenditures. It's the bigger issue. Finance Council deals with everything, just as the Finance Council does in your core or at DHQ. Things come through, the budgets, the audits. We have a big audit department. You can be proud of the Army. The Army is one of the most well-audited organizations, and we must do this. We live in a day and age where yes, we trust each other, but we trust each other with a receipt. With a receipt. It's important. Yeah, I trust you. Where's the receipt? Yeah. Yes.
You would be interested to know that the general does not have a budget. Now, you would think that the top leader of any organization, you can name them, a charity organization like ours, the CEO of that huge world organization, ours has no budget.
No.
The territorial commanders feed in or take care of the general, the chief of staff, or any of the international secretaries like we would.
Yeah.
We would have a budget, a very small budget. When I gave a party for 30 people, I had to buy the food, I had to buy the tea, and everything that went into that party. You do not have the perks, and I thought you might like to know that.
Absolutely.
That the general of the Salvation Army lived in a modest dwelling. So just an amazing, it was an eye-opener to me, where in our country, territorial commanders or divisional commanders or corps officers can buy, wow. Yeah, enough said. But to me, with a mission and ministry of a worldwide organization where we serve, well, like we're on our way to Brazil, there's not enough money to pay the employees many times. Do I have time to tell?
We gotta move on.
We were in Brazil and there was...
Yes, go ahead.
General John Marsden would say, Commissioner Maryland, speak. He's a husband.
I'm just looking at the schedule here. Okay.
We're in Brazil, and our dear friend was sent them there to be the territorial commanders of Brazil. And Pettit and Janet were on the phone with me a year after I had been at this horrendous meeting in Brazil, where the orphanage is there, and the favelas where the children are starving, and they needed money. And so everything THQ had was just given to the people. And so I was flying home, and often we flew on night flights. We didn't fly first class, we rode the cattle car. And there I am, sitting up, knowing I have to go to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm weeping. The lady next to me said, I'm in uniform, of course, and the lady said, my dear, you've been crying ever since we flew out of Brazil. I said, my heart is breaking. I said, for what I saw, we are so rich, and they have so little. My heart is breaking. She said, I'm going to remember you. I'm going to come into some
Now, the fact that I have never gotten an applause does not bother me. Praise God, I'm glad I'm only kidding. Thank you very much for that. Because that has to do with our flexibility in our government. You know that in most denominations that would never happen. Because you have to go through all of these. So the Army, it's interesting. Our Army structure frees us up. It doesn't, I've never felt stifled by it. I felt freed up by it because I can work within these parameters. And God, that's an amazing story. And by the way, why did this happen? Because we were flying in uniform. Your uniform is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
Don't ever, I encourage officers, nowadays we don't do it as much. We used to have to fly in uniform with our hats. Just like the pilots do. I went into, this was just about a year ago, I was in an airport, and one of the ticket agents, I was in uniform, she says, do you always travel in uniform? Well, actually, it wasn't a ticket agent. I was going into Canada in immigration, checking. And she looked at me, do you always travel in your uniform? And I said, just like the pilots do. Yes. But so we're living in a day and age where that's unusual. And one person said to me a few months ago, no, it was more than that, a few years ago, said, I haven't seen that uniform lately. This is our witness. This is our witness. And I had a lady in London. I'm going into Heathrow, go through all of the security, and I'm picking up my bags at the end of the security, and the lady turned to me. She said, Salvation Army. I love the Salvation Army. She went into her purse, she put some money in my hand. And I said, ma'am, give me your address, I'll give you a receipt. If I can't trust the Salvation Army, who can I trust? I said, thank you. And I didn't want to embarrass her. I put it in my pocket. I go through the line, I get out, and I look in my pocket. $100 bills. I said, Lord, help me to be as honest, upright as everybody thinks we are.
Yes.
God protect us. God protect us. So the IMC meets and the International Finance Board meets. Now, this is very, very similar. And then who writes to the territories? The zonal secretaries. Everything goes through the zone. And Joan Canning from Canada was our undersecretary, and she handled, these are the real workers at IHQ. What I'm describing at IHQ, we also have personnel conferences. Shaw Clifton started that. It used to be that when a zone needed an officer from overseas, it went from zone to zone. It took ages, months and months and months. It's much easier now. They meet, the personnel meets, and we try to see where God wants people to serve. Now, what I'm going to do is open it up to some discussion. The subject can be governance, or it can be anything we've talked about so far. Look at your questions. And I'm going to ask Dan. Dan's got the microphone here. Dan, do you mind being the roving mic? Okay. Now, questions? Yes. Also comments. Anything you want to say. I really believe that it's the Holy Spirit that works through all of us. What you have to say is very important. And we want to hear it. So, any questions? Right up here, Dan.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm coming.
Susan?
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing you mention China.
Yes. Thank you.
In China and
Yes, we are. Of course, Hong Kong now is part of China. So we've been in Hong Kong for a long time. And Hong Kong is a very, very strong Salvation Army. You break down in Kowloon, which is the middle of the city, is our territorial headquarters and our corps. We have an English-speaking corps and Cantonese and Mandarin-speaking corps. We have a lot in China. I'll get to the rest of China, but in Hong Kong, there are a lot of Filipino workers. As you notice, if you are on a cruise ship or any place in the world, a lot of Filipino, fine, usually women, who are teachers from the Philippines, but they can't make ends meet, so they go to other countries to work, usually as cleaning homes of wealthy people or taking care of the children. But the Corps in Kowloon has a special English-speaking Corps officer, and it's filled, I would say, at least 150 on their one day off Sunday. And these precious women come. And Philip, and then they have in the Army is a unique aspect in that we are known as a social service agency. And when you and I sometimes get tired of hearing that we're a social service agency and wish people knew us as a church, remember that that aspect is helping us to get into places where churches would not normally be. So we have to be very careful in China. We are in China proper doing some localized work, but we're not allowed to preach the Gospels. We're not allowed to preach the Gospel. Now, should we be there if we can't preach the Gospel? Yes. Because we preach the Gospel by who we are, or what we do. We talk to people. So it's very important. They would be in the SPIA zone, which is the south. Oh, I'm glad you asked this. The fact is that when we were at IHQ, the general decided that we would divide the whole world among the 5 zones, whether or not we were there. Okay? So Saudi Arabia is in the South Asia zone. And when we march into Saudi Arabia, someday, either before or after the Lord comes, that we know what zone it belongs to. We know what zone Israel belongs to. Also, no, Israel is with the Europe zone, which makes more sense culturally. So it's not just geographically, but every country in the world comes under a zone. Therefore, if there's a natural disaster someplace, we know what zone takes care of it. As well as the fact is that IHQ has a wonderful international disaster department. Yeah, thank you, Susan. That was a good question. And, this lady here, you had a question? Right there. Yeah, and then we're going to go.
How do you become a member of the board? And are they soldiers?
No. The member of the IMC, it's made up of commissioners at.
No, the advisory.
Are you talking about the advisory board? No, that's a very good question. No, I think I understand the question. Are you talking about the IMC or the advisory boards? Okay. The IMC is made up of officers, the commissioners at IHQ. They're all officers. But the advisory boards are made up of non-officers. And in fact, some of our best board members are Jewish people. And why? It's not a religious matter, but it's the fact that we do, deep in the Jewish culture, is the need to take care of homeless, to take care of widows and children. And our focus on widows, children, families, the Jewish people love them, and they help us a great deal. They help us. For example, in England, there are, I don't know of any advisory boards. You know. It's a North American, basically North American, Australia. Yeah. Yes, ma'am? I would say there is no standard test. But of course, the core officer is the person that invites people to come on board. And an active board will also have a nominating committee to get other board members. And of course, they look for outstanding, credible leaders in the community. That is a very good question you asked, and I thank you for that. Because they don't just sign up, they're not just volunteers, they're recruited, yes. Now, we have to get to this side too, right? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
My question is one of clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
Zone secretaries, are they appointed or selected from the
We had two high councils, 2006 and 2011. In 2011, we had 109 on the high council, which was at that time the largest number. I think in 2000, the last one was even a little larger. We're almost we're very crowded in the high council chamber at Sunbury Court now, but I think that will level off because it's a beautiful, beautiful setting there. The Catholic Church has cardinals instead of commissioners. The Catholic Church has about 150 cardinals, but that's not a lot more than we have, 109. So it's a very similar thing. The difference is that the Catholic Church represents 2 billion people, a little over 1 billion people, and we 1,001,000. So we're a lot smaller, but we are organized very similarly. When during the 5 years that we met with the Catholic Church, conversations with the Catholic Church, the 2 times we were in Rome, we stayed in 2 different locations. The last time we were in Rome, which was 2012, we stayed in a place they had built inside the walls for the cardinals when they come to elect the Pope. That's the main purpose. While they're not electing a Pope, it's a conference center. It's just inside the gate. If you've been to the St. Peter's, and going in to the gate there, you'll know that there are the Swiss guards who are at the gate. And they will not let anyone in. But if you live, as we did, for a week in that conference center, you have a gold key and jade on it. It's a jade color. And how proud we felt. We'd go up to the Swiss guards and we'd show them the key. And they'd say, "Come right in." Oh, it's a wonderful. We call it the gold key experience. The gold key. Now, it's very interesting. I lived in room 201, and they're very simple rooms. It's a nice room with a little dining area, kitchenette, no televisions, and you go in then to a bedroom, single bed, and a bathroom. So very, very simple but nice. I was in room 201. And I was watching television, I think it was 60 Minutes, about 6 months ago, gave a story about the Vatican. And lo and behold, we discovered that the Pope Francis, no relation, Pope Francis decided not to live in the luxurious papal apartments. And he went to live in the same house where we had these meetings. And he was on the 2nd floor, but he was in room 226. was just down the hallway. But he's an interesting pope, isn't he? And really loved by the people. And when General Cox went to meet him, and General Cox presented him with this book, this is published by the Salvation Army International Headquarters. You're welcome to look at it. There's some pictures here of all the groups that met. We had 6 Salvationists and 6 from the Vatican, from the Catholic Church. The Army published this, and all of the papers are in here. All of the reports, everything. So when General Cox gave this to the Pope took it and said, I have a story about the Salvation Army. He said, I grew up in Argentina. And back in Argentina in those days, as it is in many places around the world, there was no dealings between the Catholics and the Protestants. Both were suspicious of each other. Do you understand that? We experienced it, especially in the former generation, and still we see that in our society. So he said, I was 5 years old, and I was taught to never speak to a Protestant. Okay? 5 years old. He said, I was walking down the streets of Argentina with my grandmother, and we came upon 2 ladies with these bonnets. Ejército de Salvación on the bonnet. And I said to my grandmother, who are those people? She said, they are Protestants, but they are very fine people. And Pope Francis said, that was my first understanding of ecumenism. He said that was the first time that he can remember. And he's only 5 years old, so it's a very early, very, very early memory. But he says, I remember what my grandmother said, and I have always respected and loved the Salvation Army. So that goes back to the conversations with the Catholic Church. As with the Catholic Church are the commissioners of the world. Let me just, yes, the commissioners of the world meet to elect another general. In addition to commissioners are all of the full colonels who are in charge of a command and their spouses. That's why our number went from about in the 80s, I think about 86 in 2006, to 109. So it was a larger. In 2011, it was the first time there were more women in the High Council than men. I think there were six more women than men. That was new. That was unusual. So 2011 was a big change in the dynamics of the High Council. The High Council is called by the Chief of the Staff. And by the way, any Chief of the Staff and 5 territorial commanders can call for a High Council. So when we say the general is in charge, he or she is, the fact is that 5 territorial commanders plus the general, 5 territorial commanders plus the chief of the staff can call for a High Council, or 10 territorial commanders without the chief of the staff. So see, the Army has provided for unusual circumstances when, for some reason, the feeling is that the general should be deposed, and that happened once, in 1929. Now, I hope you have read General John Larson's book, 1929. If you have not, please put it at the top of your reading list. It is a page-turner. You can't put it down. Let me promise you right away that John Larson writes so well, and you can't put it down. You just keep turning the page. the details of this famous 1929 High Council are there. The Army was in a critical point in its existence. It could have disintegrated in 1929 for the reason that the general General Booth had died in 1912, and in the safe in his office, and that he only had he and an outside lawyer had the combination, not anybody in the Army. But he put in that safe the name of the person to follow him. That was the system. And of course we know that he put in his son, who was then the chief of staff, Bramwell Booth. So after General Booth died, they opened the safe. There it was, Bramwell Booth. Now Bramwell became very old and, in fact, to all practical purposes, a bit senile. So that he was thinking he needed to be replaced. The founder, General William Booth, did put into place the possibility of a High Council. He took into account there may be a time when the general is disabled. Now, when he, by the way, he died about 6 months after the High Council, but it was council. That's why one of the territorial commanders had a heart attack at the High Council. One of the key players in the 1929 High Council, of course, Evangeline Booth was there. Evangeline was there. And one of the other key players was Samuel Logan Bringle. Bringle attended the High Council. Remember, he's not a territorial commander, but he was a commissioner. He was one of the few non-territorial commanders that had the rank of commissioner because of his writings and influence on the Army. He was at the High Council, and the record shows that he became a real catalyst to bringing these groups together. He was a holy man of God, highly respected. And at first he supported keeping Bramwell Booth as the general. He was a company man. Let's follow the rules. He was in a delegation that was sent to London during the High Council to plead with General Bramwell to relinquish his position. But you see, General Bramwell felt very loyal to his father, loyal to the system, to the old system, which was an autocratic system, and the answer was no. His daughter was at the High Council. Not his daughter, his wife came to the High Council and pleaded for her husband. This is a High Council filled with drama. And Evangeline was on the other side of the aisle. You think the Democrats and Republicans are on different sides of the aisle. It was Evangeline also felt that her brother should relinquish the position. And so she was on the other side. This caused a real rift in their relationship, of course. Now, I'm not going to say much more because I want you to read the book. It is, and when you put the book down, you say, thank God for these men and women of integrity who went through the fire and the waters of almost splitting the Army in half and therefore dissolving it. And it was at this High Council. The feelings were so bad is not a good word for it. They were so intense and so emotional that the next High Council, they decided not to go back to Sun River. It was that, because of the memory. And they went to, I believe it was Tottenham Hall. They went, yeah, Tottenham Hall. But interestingly enough, if you go to, when you go to Sudbury Court, you go in and see all the pictures of all high councils, you'll see a high council that elected Higgins, the chief of the staff. And it meets exactly, it's all it's all in the Salvation Army Act of 1980, which is just a revision of the original deed poll that I referred to before. Here is a letter dated the 17th of January, 2011. It's to all members of the General's Consultative Council. I didn't mention this before, but the General has the General's Consultative Council that meets about 4 times a year, made up of all the commissioners at IHQ, all the commissioners at IHQ, plus 5 or 6, maybe even a little more from around the world, and they're rotating, so every time these 5 or 6 are different. And they talk about big things, not big, even bigger than the IMC. They talk about the junior soldier program or whatever it is. I gave a presentation there once to the GCC on holiness. So these are the big issues of the day, the sacraments, big issues of the day that would be discussed at the General's Consultative Council. And it says it's regarding the Salvation Army Act of 1980, and it's from Commissioner Kenneth Potter. You know, Ken is from the West Coast. He's now territorial commander in Kenya West. And he is the legal constitutional advisor to the General. Now, you can flip through this sometime. The forward is, all of this here is the Act. Salvation Army Act of 1980, Chapter 3 there, and it goes the Army, the powers of the General, and accounts, paragraph, sections, mortgages, common investment schemes, power of investment respecting certain Army trusts, duty in choosing investments, the High Council, the Salvation Army trustee, all of this, and every member of the High Council is expected to read this document with next to a dictionary, because it's legalese in many cases, and to know what our deed poll is. This is very important for members of the High Council as they meet to elect a new general. So we read it carefully. We are summoned to Sunbury Court, and this is the notebook that you received. This is the 2006 High Council. And all of the pages here that everyone apparently has read, beginning with the High Council, it has everybody's picture there. All members of the High Council. They're listed. There's a little bio of every person in the High Council. And then you start with information. Introducing the 2006 High Council, preliminary information and it indicates what every other High Council has done. Adoption of orders of procedure. It becomes very procedural and confidential, and everybody for those 2 weeks. The average High Council lasted about 10 days. Because, unlike the Catholic Church, those who have stood for nomination, those who have been nominated and agreed to stand, many people do, are nominated, and then decide not to stand. But those who stand, when the vote is taken, the one with the fewest votes must drop out. At the same time, every other person in the group has an opportunity to drop out if they see the way the votes are going. Unlike in the Catholic Church, you can never drop out. Catholic Church just keeps voting and putting up the black smoke every day until finally somebody wins the 2/3. And ours is 2/3 also. 2/3 must elect the general on the first 3 votes. If no one gets 2/3 after the 3rd vote, the 4th vote goes to a simple majority. That's half plus 1. 2/3 plus 1. So it's very similar, but there are those differences. That's why it takes the Catholic Church a little longer sometimes than the Army, because every time we have a vote, someone drops out. And it's, as I said, 10 days, but you're supposed to give at least 3 weeks on your calendar to block it out, because you know that you're there. It's questioned until the general is elected. You must read all of these documents here. Here's the constitutional memorandum. Memorandum on the constitutional background of the High Council. Peter Smith, who's our constitutional expert, and with us. He is the officer, he was the legal counsel to the general, and he was one of the few non-council members who were at the council, along with Rob Barrett, who was the assistant to the general, a few other people there that had to keep the agenda moving ahead. Then there's all kinds of schedules, orders of procedures, minutes, and you were supposed to have read, I'm sure everybody did, every word of this in preparation for the High Council. You arrive at Sunbury Court, you have everything, the Army does it well, as you know, in all of its meetings. You arrive there, you are welcomed. There's usually 3 days with the general, him or herself, and it's considered a general's consultative council. So the general speaks to the leaders, and it's really his or her last time to do so in that type of setting. It's usually a very spiritual time. Well, I remember them very well. And after those 3 days, the chief of the staff takes charge, and the general is pleasantly but firmly dismissed. And at that point in time, the High Council has total authority in the Army. It's a very unique legal thing. And that is that the general or his spouse or her spouse, the general and the general's spouse, are not allowed to come back to any of the meetings. And ostensibly, they don't even know what's happening. But anyway, they don't know what's happening in the meetings. The chief of the staff then is in charge, and his or her first responsibility after bringing devotions, this is we meet, and he or she brings devotions, and his first and only responsibility as chief of the staff is to elect the president of the High Council. The president of the High Council is elected by ballot. And every person is called, and by the way, you're seated and you're called by your tenure. That is, those right in close proximity are the old guys and gals who have been there a long time. Not by age, but by appointment. So you vote, first of all, right away for the president. The nominees then are taken back into a room with the chief of the staff. The chief of the staff tells you how many votes you received, and you are asked if you want to proceed. And I would say that normally everyone who is nominated for any of these positions, there is a real feeling is, why should you say no? This is the High Council, this is God at work, who am I to interrupt in any way what God is saying? So most accept that. I had the privilege in 2011 to become the president of the High Council. And in fact, after you're the president of the High Council, you really get used to people saying, Mr. President, Mr. President, it's a nice feeling. The feeling lasts for about the 10 days and then it's over. But it's a great responsibility, and you're expected, that's why you have to read all this stuff ahead, because you're expected to know what the procedures are. And you, in fact, for those 10 days, take on the leadership of a group now that has the most power in the Army for those 10 days. I'll tell you how much power. The High Council is not required to do any procedure. The High Council, if they wanted to, although they read everything that happened in the last High Council, the High Council would say, okay, let's vote, and they vote, and the general, they have a general, and that's it. But that doesn't happen. Because there's a lot of tradition, and the first few days, the president of the High Council, can you imagine, it's probably the most difficult position, because you are trying to get 109 territorial leaders to have one mind on any subject. And you go through all of the rules. You go through the rules for the question committee. You go through all of the rules. And invariably, there are very fine leaders who say, no, I think there should be 3 instead of 2. And so you just have to keep smiling and never let them see you sweat. And I'm really being a little facetious in this, because there is always the sense of we're doing God's will, we've got to do it the right way.
And it's all bathed in prayer.
Bathed in prayer. We have the next person who was elected, by the way, is the chaplain. And the chaplain's responsibility is a heavy responsibility for prayer, for singing of hymns, for reading of scripture throughout all of this. And there is very, very little frivolity, if any, as we move forward. It is very respectful of each other, but we all realize day after day why we're there. So the first 3 or 4 days is really approving the rules that we will follow. And those rules are, I would say, 95% the same as the previous High Council, but things have changed. Things do change, and for good reasons. By the way, after the High Council, the Chief of the Staff immediately calls the President and about 5 or 6 members of the High Council to come back to London and review the whole process and set up a whole new list, a proposal, a recommendation, let's say, recommendations for the next High Council to run. And that was done. In 2011, again, the honor of being nominated for general, felt again, just whatever the Lord wants. So I did. Therefore, they had to elect a whole new president. And it took, goes through the whole process. And they elected Commissioner Jim Nax, who took my place. The vice president, who was also elected, was Betty Mateer. She was with me for the first 6 or 7 days. And her husband was nominated for general. So she felt that she should resign being the vice chair, the vice president. So that had to all be gone through. And Commissioner Brecky, who's now Mrs. Clifton, Commissioner Brecky became the vice chairman. Then the nominations, at one point the nominations began. Very solemn. There's a little box right in front of the High Council with a little lock on it. And the head, by the way, there are so many people that are voted on, like I mentioned the chaplain is voted on, and then those who count the votes, you vote for that person who's a head counter, and then there's 3 or 4 others that count the votes, sign that these votes are correct. All the votes after each vote, by the way, are destroyed. In the box, the head teller opens the box and shows everyone that there's nothing in the box. This is not a magic trick, there's just nothing in the box. He closes it, he happened to be a him, and locks it, puts it here. Everybody has a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper, first of all, you have to have, the president has to initial it. So there's never a question that the votes in there were exactly the person that the president gave it to a person. They couldn't come in from outside. That was the idea. So they had to initial it. They would come down, they would go out into 2 rooms, and actually there's a possibility of 3 rooms. At one time we used all 3 rooms in the back. And the person can stay there as long as he or she wants to in prayer. It usually wasn't a long time. There was no pressure. And you put down with prayer the person that you are voting for. You come back in, and as you come back in, somebody else's name is called, and that person comes forward to get their ballot. And you come in and you put it in the ballot box. The ballot box then goes to this group of people who count the ballots. You're very careful in counting them. And the head person has to sign that all of the ballots are in. Everybody has to agree. And he gives the ballots then to the principal, to the president. And the numbers of votes are there and given to everyone. This is for all of I'm just doing nominations. So those who receive at least 3 nominations, you can't nominate yourself, are then asked if the president takes them aside. I think there were about 10. Takes them aside, says, if you receive so many votes, do you want to proceed? And whatever they say, yes or no, the president reports on that. So-and-so said, oh, he did it. The High Council does not know how many votes people receive. Only the person that was nominated knows. And then that person, finally, at the end, they go through every person that was nominated and agreed to be nominated, and they say, will you stand for nomination? And you stand up, and you have a chance to express yourself. Basically, it's yes or no. Sometimes people just add a little bit to it. Thank you for this honor. Yes, I will stand. And then I'm going to talk about that. And then after that, they asked the spouse to stand and said, "Do you agree?" Now, of course, this is just a matter of procedure. Right? Everybody knows that the spouse no doubt would agree by this time. By the way, there is a break where the spouses can talk. There's a whole afternoon break where you can pray and make this decision. It's not all procedure. So you have the nominations. When I was nominated and accepted, there were 10. The next day and a half, and I think we pushed it to 2 days, was completely free for everyone except the 10 nominees and their spouses who had to answer questions that the Questions Committee had decided on. That's a whole other procedure that's going on during these days, Questions Committee. I think we had about 26 questions. The candidates had to answer. There was more questions in 2006. I think 32 questions. And so in those 2 days, you have to answer the questions. And by the way, you not only answer, you type them out, you answer them. And when you hand them in, officially hand them in, you cannot change your answer. You must read your answer. You are not allowed to edit at all. And that is because when other people are giving their answers, if you're last in line, you may change some of your answers according to what is just human nature. But you can't do that. You must. And everybody has your text.
And the spouse.
And I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get to it. And the spouses. Spouses have 6 questions because they're not electing the spouse. They're electing the general. But the spouse, of course, is an integral part in the Army, especially of our team ministry. So the questions are different, but just as important. 6 questions that the spouses have to answer. And they, too, must write out their answers. And it must be exact. It must be exact. I remember on one occasion, one nominee wanted to change something. And there was a whole discussion about this, and it was just one word. Anyway, I don't think it was changed either, because we're following the guidelines, okay? The procedure. So then you stand up. It's all by lot. Whoever comes after each other, they just pick it out of the hat, and you're the next one up. Actually, they do that early so that everybody knows what order they're going to be in. Everybody has their answers there. What do you think about this? If you were a general, what would you do about this? What do you think about what is your concept of the chief of the staff's position? All kinds of questions that go through a whole process by all the times these questions are finished. And you can answer as long or as short as you want. You answer the questions, and then you go on. When you're finished, the president of the High Council then said, "Are there any questions for clarification?" Not for amplification, but for clarification. So something you did not understand. So everybody has a chance. Mr. President, I'd like the nominee to indicate, did he or she say this or whatever it is. They have it in the text there. So it's just clarification. What did you mean by it? But you couldn't expand on the concept. Just answer the question. Then the next one comes in. This takes a long time. It takes a long time to go through all of these questions. Then the spouses. I believe the spouses come right after the presentation by the candidate, where it could come right at the end, and they all come together. Right after, okay. And again, any clarifications? You move ahead. Then we go back to the beginning, and they draw lots again, and every candidate has a chance to make a speech. No matter, I mean, this is your speech. You have to write it out. You make your speech, but there's no time limit to the speech. Actually, I don't think you have to. You make your speech. There's no time limit to the speech. I time it. I always. It's just something that I do because I don't want to go to sleep, so I want to do something. So I time it. The shortest one was 1 minute 45 seconds. The longest one was 22 minutes. And there have been others that have been longer. I remember a person who had been to many high councils who said to me once, he said, you know, I've heard people talk themselves into and out of being the chairman in their speeches. You know? So, there's a, you know, it's just human nature, what you're saying in the speech. There can never be applause. There can never be any reaction. And that is tough in speech. Because you don't find anybody shaking their head one way or the other. They're just looking at you like your congregation does sometimes. I have no idea what you're saying. I have no idea. Even though they do. So most of the time people are reading as you speak. And you are reading. And they can make little notes, of course, if they'd like to. Now it's not over yet. Because then the candidates are dismissed and the rest of the High Council can ask follow-up questions. Personal questions. Like, you only have 3 years left, for example. What could you hope to accomplish in 3 years? You know, that type of thing. Or you haven't had this certain type of position. Is that going to be a detriment? All of these are fed back to the nominees, and they come in and answer those questions. And they're not frivolous. In fact, that's the job of the Questions Committee, to take away anything that really doesn't matter. It's a very good questions. Okay? That's it. Then, when the voting begins, the High Council moves very steady and quickly. And that's why once people know that everything is ready for the votes to begin, they realize that it's going to be steady. You keep voting. As I said, of the first 3 votes, you will become the general if you get one more vote than 2/3 of the people present. And this is what we have to sign that we will never reveal that for 10 years. Now, when somebody, of course, when the general is announced very quickly, then you know there weren't too many votes. But it can go, once it goes to the fourth vote, it goes to 50%. And the only reason there would ever be a 5th vote, and there haven't, is that the 4th vote was a tie. If the 4th vote's a tie, then you can go, you have to 5th vote. And it's very steady. After each vote, the names are read in order of the votes that they received. Okay? And at that time, after the votes are given, you can indicate to the president that you would like your name withdrawn. During the break, you just say, like, withdrawn, the president says so-and-so is withdrawn. And then you keep voting, until finally the president says, I'm pleased to say that we have a new chair. And the general, oh, by the way, we do not put white smoke. However, this beautiful place where we meet now, General Rader built this new beautiful facility. Some report because the High Council was growing in number. Beautiful facility. But their windows are all around. It's a circular facility. And when the general is announced, they don't want anyone else to know before everybody, the general is announced to the High Council. So all of the shades, there's a button, and all the shades go down. And then the people at the house, they're in the office, they're looking. They have a general, the shades are coming down. And then they announce the general, there's balloons, applause. The general-elect speaks. The president of the High Council goes from the chamber over to the main building, and where the president is waiting. And the president tells the new general, or the old general, who the new general is. They both come back into the chamber, and the general now, still the general of the Salvation Army, will greet the general-elect, which is usually not, and that general-elect, by the way, doesn't take office for about 2 months. It's on a specific date, except for a few circumstances, and even recent circumstances where the general resigned. And therefore, when General Cox was elected, as soon as his name was announced, he was the general. As soon as his name was announced, because General Linden had resigned. So that was immediate. Normally, there's about two months in between. Then it's not over yet. Everybody, then the general must personally greet every person in the High Council. So let's say the general's standing here, general-elect, and you come in order of seniority. You come, you greet the general and say whatever you want to them, and they say whatever they want to you. Usually it's a very similar thing. Congratulations. But then you come to what is the holiness table, and you sign your name. You sign your name that so-and-so has been elected, and you recognize that. So, in the sense, it is 100% the end. No one ever withholds their signature on that. I have been here. I have seen the procedures. I agree with the way the High Council has been run. And after that, let the party begin. And the new general then general-elect meets with the general the next day and talks about everything. That's it. Now, are there any questions? Yes, ma'am. Do we have the, Dan? Yeah.